to the show. But first, I'd like to say, hi, everybody. Frankie Picasso, you don't know who I am. Anyway, most days I'm willing to bet that most of you or us don't give a thought about brain health, certainly not the top consideration that it deserves. As you're picking up your dinner at the grocery store, do you ever think about the workout you're going to give your brain today? Unlike you think about hitting the gym, running, cycling, any of the other things that we do to strengthen our heart, our lungs, our muscles. In fact, I bet unless you're pregnant, over 50, play football, hockey, worry about concussions, suffered a brain injury, or live with a neurological disease like Parkinson's, or you had a stroke, it's not something you actively think about. But joining me today are one right now, maybe two brain experts, colleagues and co-authors who might have you reconsidering that which you haven't considered. With me right now is Dr. Daniel Monti. He is the founding director and the CEO of the Marcus Institute of Integrative Health and the founding chair of the Department of Integrative Medicine and Nutritional Sciences at the Thomas Jefferson University Medical College in Philadelphia. That is a mouthful.
I know.
His research focuses on assessing promising mind-body interventions and brain mechanisms of stress and emotional regulation, and is the co-author of the popular book, Tapestry of Health. Joining us soon, maybe, is Dr. Andrew Newberg. He's the research director of the Marcus Institute of Integrative Health and the rest of all that. And he's also a professor there. And he's the author of 10 books, including the bestseller, How God Changes Your Brain. And he is regarded as one of the most influential neuroscientists working today. And the two doctors, hopefully will join us, and they're going to speak about their newest book, Brain Weaver. It just came out this May, Creating the Fabric for a Healthy Mind Through Integrative Medicine, an essential guide to help you keep your brain as healthy as possible for as long as possible. First, I want to thank you, Dr. Monti, on writing Brain Weaver, because it's exactly the type of book we didn't know that we needed. And you did it in a way that wasn't doctor speak. It's very, very reader friendly for anybody. So kudos on that. And
well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
And just before I get into it, I just wanted to say that it's through the philanthropy of Bernie Marcus, the co-founder of Home Depot, whose charity founded the Marcus Institute of Integrative Health. He also gave the foreword in the book. And so would you say it's kind of fair to say that through his generosity, it's allowed you guys to kind of play and come up with, a lot of the integrative therapies that you have when it comes to the brain?
Yeah, definitely. I would take it even a step beyond that, really, because what we have at the medical college at Thomas Jefferson University is the first ever Department of Integrative Medicine. It's as you said, the mouthful, Integrative Medicine and Nutritional Sciences, because we do a lot of nutrition with what we do. But it is now a specialty department. It sits alongside dermatology, OBGYN, surgery, medicine, and now integrative medicine. And this is a historic first. And because of the Marcus Foundation and Mr. Marcus, we were able to do many clinical trials and develop our model of care. And they allowed us, when we built our new facility a few years ago, to purchase one of the best pieces of brain imaging equipment available in the world. Few people have it. It's an integrated PET MRI. PET stands for positron emission tomography. And then the best MRI technology is with it. And what that does, what it allows us to do, is have the best anatomic picture of the brain and nervous system and body, along with visualizing the function of the brain and the nervous system and the rest of the body, so that when we do some of the integrative therapies that we talk about in Brain Weaver and in our other books, we show people in that book the pre-post brain scans, the pre-post body scans, so that you can see when you actually take care of your brain the way that we talk about in Brain Weaver, it can make a huge difference in the way the brain looks and in the way the brain talks to itself and in the way the brain talks to the rest of the body.
It's absolutely fascinating. And the pictures, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? Yeah. And I looked at that and I thought, the saying, I looked at the creative brain and I went, it's on fire. And it literally is on fire, because you got the left and the right hemisphere with all that red in between, because they have to meld a little bit, and just going, the sparks are just coming off like you're firing on all cylinders. It's crazy. You see it.
And you know what? And you know what's not happening? So that's perfect. That's exactly what's going on. And what's not happening when we really engage our creative brain is that the distress part of the brain isn't as loud. So when we engage in some of these behaviors that we know are healthy for the brain, like creative expression, whatever it is for you, even spirituality, the brain actually acts differently. And those distress circuits in the brain calm down, and other areas of the brain that are actually health promoting amp up.
Well, I wasn't going to take us down this path yet. And I was thinking
Right.
about it. But now that we're here, I have to ask you because I was in a hospital for 6 months. I had a really bad motorcycle accident. And, you know, I've suffered with chronic pain now for the last 18 years. But I tell people, if you want to get beyond your pain, you have to do something that's kind of creative where you're outside of your brain now, and you don't even feel your pain anymore. So like a puzzle or something that, you know, takes a lot of concentration, not just reading, but really creating something, artwork, some music, anything that really, you know, is such a narrow focus in a way that nothing else is there except what you're doing, and all that pain, it just goes away. It's like, well, it's there, but it's in the background.
It is the perfect advice to give people. It actually coincides very closely with the data that we've been able to gather for our clinical trials. So different types of things do accomplish this. So we mentioned art, artistic expression, engaging and things like that. Really what we're trying to do is create space between us and the outside world. That in that space, you can put creativity, spiritual exercises, meditation. All of those things have a big impact. And in fact, our studies that look at when people meditate, for example, when they engage in mindfulness or mindfulness-based stress reduction, big changes. Because again, this is a focused activity that allows you to create some space between you and whatever it is that's distressing you. That space is so necessary so that you are not, so that the distress isn't the only thing being amplified in the brain.
Right.
And we have studies, and we show this, the brain scans, whether people pray, whether people meditate, whether people engage in, you know, serious artistic expression, like you said, really sort of putting your whole self into it, big impact.
Well, I'm just going to read a little excerpt that I took from the book because you just said something that was really interesting. So it is integrative, and you talk about the spirituality and the social aspect, and, you know, the creative aspect, and all the, you know, this integrated brain, really. So in the spiritual brain, when you talk about the spirituality of the brain or the spiritual, you have a study that shows that people who attend church most often have the lowest rate of anxiety and depression. And there was another study by Dr. Lisa Miller in adolescents as well, who attended church, and most often they had a lower risk of depression, substance abuse, and suicide. Now, I'm thinking part of that is birds of a feather. You feel comfortable when you're with people who think alike. But the other part of that is, do you know that you're not alone? There's a God looking after things. And what is the other, like, the spark there that lowers that incidence of depression?
Those are two big things. Again, we don't know exactly, but from the data that those are two big things. One, we're talking about things that are outside ourselves. And in a way, all of this conversation is about how do you get outside yourself a little bit, so that you're not caught up in the script going on inside of your brain, and that script and the emotions associated with getting more and more amplified. So the two things you mentioned there, going to church regularly or whatever your religious worship is, synagogue, whatever, that provides a sense of community. And so that experience of others, as you said, like-minded others who you're connecting to, is very helpful, and it's very important for the brain. The brain is hardwired to be in community. That's part of our survival. That's one of the reasons it's so important. The other thing is we are hardwired to think about something outside of ourselves. That's why Dr. Newberg's original book was something called, like, Why God Won't Go Away. It's because we're hardwired to think about something outside of ourselves. So in a way, we're engaging in these parts of the brain that are important, and again, allow us to be detached from our stressors, even if for short moments of time. The other thing is there's something very powerful about ritual. And one of the things that I tell people when they realize, I need to sort of re-engage in spirituality in some way. And for me, spirituality is whatever, it is meaningful for you, whatever creates meaning outside of yourself. And for people who were brought up in a religious tradition, I sometimes encourage them, unless they had a really bad experience with it, because it's familiar, maybe there's something you can find back in that.
Mm-hmm.
And, I sort of find religion now sort of like our political system, even if we're talking about something like, the Catholic Church, there's the really conservative branch, there's the more progressive groups. I'm like, find your niche in whatever it is. If you were raised Catholic, if you were raised Lutheran, if you were raised Jewish, if there's a way that you can connect to a community you have familiarity with, the rituals, then they remind you of things that then engage you and engage your brain in something outside of itself.
Well, you mentioned in the book about the nun whose brain scans showed, because her meditation practices, that her actual sense of self went away, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
So, and you talk about when you give, like charitably,
yes.
From generosity, not just because it looks good on the books. There's that piece of your brain that likes that.
That's right. Being altruistic, and that's why sometimes, for some people, their religious community works for them because it engages those areas of the brain to do things for others, to be charitable. Although some people say, I don't want to go back to my church, but I want to do, okay, there's lots of ways you can give back. There's lots of ways you can engage in helping the community if you don't want to do it through that particular route, but you're doing positive things for the brain, because in a way that sort of altruism is very powerful. And, I was asked the question, we were doing a pre-launch webcast for the book, and the moderator said, well, what do you do? Meaning me. And I was like, oh, I'm on the spot. And I have to say that, whether it's meditation or prayer, for me, what really works is to remind myself of all the things I have gratitude for.
That's a good one.
And when I do that, the voice of all the things that distress me gets smaller and smaller. And, different things work for different people. Another thing that works for a lot of people is to, along with these things, because we don't have to do just one thing, we can be spiritual, creative. And the other thing is, we're smiling and being light with one another. That is huge. We are in such a heavy time right now.
Right.
And it's been heavy for a year and a half for lots of reasons. And so that heaviness, but to be able to, I was telling people, like, even if it's on a Zoom call, connect with your friends and laugh. Yeah. Like, that is a different area of the brain than the area of the brain that's feeling distress. And you mentioned pain. There have been studies in pain populations where when they actually have like comedy night and humor and periods of time where they can really just let go and laugh, that has huge effects on their distress associated with the pain.
Yeah, I can totally see that. It's such an interesting thing, because you talk about the brain is social, and yet there's many people who like to be alone. And are they alone with their thoughts? Is that like being with somebody? I don't know. But so what about those people?
Yeah.
How does their brain work?
There are different personality styles, and of course, a lot of work has been done. We've all heard the terms introversion versus extroversion, and there is something to all of that based upon all of the data. What that means, though, is that you derive your energy from sort of finding alone periods of time to recharge versus recharging when you're amongst others. But having social connection is still important, whether or not you're an introvert or an extrovert. And so, many people who classify themselves as an introvert still have, people
Friends
that are feeling, psychologically comfortable, still have strong social support systems. They just like smaller groups. They like more one-on-one lunches versus a big lunch with all of their friends kind of things. So it isn't that they're completely isolated. That's a very, very small group of people that prefer that. And oftentimes there's other issues when that's the case.
Yeah, this has been a really tough year for a lot of people. And I especially felt it because I am an extrovert, and I do like to be around, people. And even just yesterday, I had such a heaviness, and I talked to other people. Yesterday was a heavy day for a lot of people for some reason. They're feeling very sad. But it's been the isolation. I think that's the biggest part of that. And so our brain, creative in other ways, but even I found my creativity and the passion for things were waning because of being less social.
Yes. The isolation really takes its toll. And on top of that, it's just one of the things compounding the stress that we feel. Stress isn't just a vague concept. And one of the things that we talk about in Brain Weaver is the biology of stress, so that people understand this has nothing to do with, are you a weak person or a strong person? Stress is stress. And if there's too much of it, it's going to take its toll on your nervous system, and hence the whole rest of your body, because your nervous system connects with everything, including your immune cells. So we know from many, many studies that people who are more distressed are more prone to getting infections and doing worse if they have an illness versus people who are less distressed. So stress just simply is a part of the nervous system. Now we need some stress, and also we're hardwired to feel stress for survival purposes. Yeah. If we think about the autonomic nervous system, it's the part of the nervous system we don't have to think about. There's the two main branches that many people may have studied. I'll just remind you, there's the fight or flight that activates you when there's some perceived threat to your well-being. Doesn't mean that it's life-threatening, just a perceived threat to your well-being puts you in fight or flight mode. Then there's the restoration and recuperation mode, which we need when we relax, when we're connecting to our loved ones, when we sleep, when we're at ease, when we're laughing, those kinds of things, right? So we need the balance. We need a lot of that restoration and recuperation, but when we're in a time like we just experienced, very hard to get there, because a lot of the tools that people had to get into restoration and recuperation, like you were saying, connecting with others, those are gone for a period of time. And then think about this. This activation is a survival reason, but it's supposed to be short-lived. So if, back in time, you were in the jungle and you saw a lion in the distance, that would put you into fight or flight mode. If you were smart, flight, and you'd find a tree and the lion would go away. Yeah. The threat is gone. Your nervous system relaxes. You go off and do what you need to be doing. But the lions of yesterday are replaced today by a pandemic. And what about the—
not getting money, you work from home, your job, your business just went out.
Yes. All of those things, people that you're concerned about that might be vulnerable if they get sick, and what's happening with my income, and what's happening with my homeschooling, or if you have kids in college, what's going to be going on. There was so much uncertainty. Yeah. Our brain doesn't like uncertainty. That is actually distressing. So the stress never stopped. And then people are saying, I don't know, I gained weight even though I wasn't eating differently. This is a very common thing I heard, because it's part of the stress response. When we're under stress, we conserve energy, and many people gained weight. People gained weight during the pandemic. It wasn't just that they were stress eating; the extra cortisol going on in their system was contributing to that.
Okay.
So there was just so much.
Pandemic 15 or 20.
That's right.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And as you were talking, what came to mind too was the brain is so interesting in that it doesn't differentiate between the scary movie and the adrenaline, the fight or flight, or reality. So the opposite is also true then for the happiness and the social. You can trick the brain, right? You can trick the brain into feeling those feel-good feelings too. If you can trick it, if you get scared by watching TV, you can be happy at the same time.
Yeah, I'm not so into television programming that puts you into fight or flight, because I think we have enough of it right now.
Yeah.
And so I tell people, maybe limit how much news you watch, because the news networks want to keep you in fight or flight. They want you to think that everything is the end of the world every day.
Yeah, Chicken Little.
A senator said this, end of the world. A congressman said this, end of the world. When really it's not. And so catch-ups, sure, but that's about 15 minutes. The rest is just people's opinions on the news all day long.
Repeat.
Making you all in fight or flight. And the other thing is this is not the time to be watching, the kind of stuff that's really going to put you in that ultra frightened, ultra activated mode. If you're already distressed, watch things that make you feel good.
Yeah.
And, when you do things that make you smile, talk to people that allow you to have sort of a lightheartedness, which I bet you're really good at, because I feel myself being lighthearted talking to you.
Thanks. Thank you. Well, it's so funny. I talked to a girlfriend this morning, and I was telling her about your book, and she goes, "Oh, wow, it's so." I go, "But of course, there's a diet." So you do have a diet in the book. The brain has a diet that's good for it, and if you want to have this longevity of a brain, then you got to integrate all of these wonderful things. You have to be happy, and you have to be social, and you have to have a diet. And the diet is, lessens the inflammation, but it also feeds the brain.
We have to feed the nervous system with the nutrients it needs. And we want to minimize the stuff that's going to be toxic to the brain. And listen, it's not that you have to be perfect all the time. The things that we're talking about go a long way. If we think about inflammation, and inflammation spurs the disease processes of everything we worry about once we hit adulthood, including cognitive decline. There's inflammation we can control and inflammation we can't. But some of the inflammation we can control is in the form of stress. That's why it's so important. How we navigate life and the stressors in life, so important. But also what we eat. And when we eat excessive amounts of inflammatory foods, and these are oftentimes the processed foods with a lot of extra fat and sugar in them.
Which we go to when we're depressed and upset.
Right. And we're, when we were, confined to home, you kind of want the comfort food as you're just sitting there watching news all day, saying how bad everything is. So I guess it's time for a cookie to make me feel better. And then another cookie and then another cookie. And so I think that, now that we're kind of coming out of that, and the world is looking a little more hopeful and those kinds of things, then, it's never too late, by the way. What we find from our studies is from short interventions, the body changes. We're doing a study right now with one of our colleagues in the cancer center, and she's done a lot of work with calories, and we're looking at different types of diets. But really, even after a few days of strictly doing the right thing, the body starts to respond to it, and some of the tumor markers change in the positive direction. Things. It isn't like all is lost because you might have had a few months where you let things slip. That's okay. Right. Yeah. Pick it back up. You don't have to be all or nothing. All isn't lost if you were pretty good all week, but you had a bad day. Then,
so is it true though, or not true? Is it a myth that your brain will stop you from losing weight? Like, what, and why would it? Like, if you're trying really hard and you're not, like, is it the brain?
It usually is. There's so many factors involved. The brain, when the brain is highly distressed, then we have stress hormones being released that make it hard to lose weight. It actually, you kind of hold on to weight sometimes when you're really distressed. It's just something that happens as a hormonal reaction, which is why stress reduction is part of the overall picture of maintaining a good body weight. Yeah. And then we also want to sort of minimize those inflammatory fatty foods and eat as many plants as you can. Yeah. You have to be a vegan? No, but you want to get those plant nutrients into you. I think a lot of people just don't eat any.
Yeah.
And I tell people, one meal a day, can you make a salad? Or one meal a day, can you make a smoothie? Yeah. That makes huge differences in your overall health.
I have a smoothie every morning. But the news, scary, salads have E. coli now, right? You go, oh my God, I can't even eat lettuce. It's it's crazy. But what I found really interesting, and I sent it to somebody right away, was you talk about depression and that probiotics can help lessen depression because it's in the gut. It's all coming from your gut. So how exciting is that you might even be able, without medication, be able to take a probiotic, even a prebiotic, I don't know, but probiotics for sure, and lessen your depression.
So this gut-brain connection is something that people are doing a lot of work on right now, because one thing that I often try to glitch up the medical students when I'm working with them, because when you get out of the basic science years and you're out in the clinic, you sometimes don't link the basic science to the clinical, and so I often say, what's the biggest immune organ in the body? And they might be like the spleen or the bone marrow. And I'm like, those are big, but there's something even bigger. And that's your gut. Your gut has immune tissue all throughout it. And that immune tissue can get hyperreactive, which can cause inflammatory responses based upon what the state of the rest of the gut is. And so what we put in our gut matters. And also that gut microbiome that we hear so much about, what does that really mean? It's the invisible layer of microbes that really is the protective barrier between you and the outside world. Because we're taking in all types of pathogens and all types of things all the time that gut microbiome protects us from. That gut microbiome also has other functions like converting vitamins into their activated form, and also contributes to how tight the junctions are along the cells of the gut wall to kind of prevent that leaky gut, so prevent toxins from coming in and things like that. So that microbiome is important. What you mentioned two words, probiotics and prebiotics. I like to make sure that people know what those are because they're important. Because the microbiome is so important, sometimes when you really are in a dysregulated state, I tell people go ahead and take a probiotic to kind of get that back on track and then maintain it with prebiotics. What are prebiotics? Prebiotics are basically, think of them as fiber. Those microbes feed on the fiber. And when they don't have enough of it, they feed on you. And that's part of the gut irritation people often have, because we have this thin sort of like layer in the gut that has sugar on it that they need food. And so that fiber, that kind of, we used to just think it was a bulking agent to help you have regular bowel movements, but we actually need it for the gut microbiome. So I always say, eat lots of fiber along with, and you don't have to worry about taking in a lot of fiber if you take the advice of eating a nice plant-dense meal every day, because you're getting good fiber in that.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So it used to be okay. Yogurt used to be okay. Now dairy's off the table, but I mean, I still eat Greek yogurt every day because it's got 17 grams of protein in it, which I think is pretty good.
Yeah.
And I like it, but I use zero fat yogurt. I don't know if that makes a difference, but
makes a difference.
Does it?
It does. So here's the thing with dairy. It's a different story depending upon who you are and what your genetics are. There are some people who do okay with dairy, and there's some people who really struggle with dairy. And it's because there's different components of dairy that can cause different types of problems. So many people don't know it, but up to 60% of US adults start to have problems with the lactose. And so then you get the gassiness, the bloating or whatever, and your gut is unhappy when you're taking in the lactose and you're losing lactase, the enzyme that breaks it down. Another issue with dairy, you mentioned the fat-free. The fat in dairy is very inflammatory because it's biochemically the same as the fat at the end of a pork chop, I like to cut that off, you want to like minimize that kind of animal fat, and that's why when people have dairy, I'm like, well, if you feel like you do fine with dairy and dairy doesn't bother you, then fat-free definitely is the way to go, because that fat is very inflammatory.
Right.
And so the other thing is excessive amounts of even the protein might be inflammatory too, but I'm talking about excessive amounts. Yeah. So I think that people find their way here on this.
Yeah, because a lot of people have problems with the beans.
Yes.
Right? The gas
Absolutely.
in the beans. Cabbage, there's broccoli, that family, people have problems with that too. So you eat what you can eat, I guess, and you just do the best you can.
Right. And back to sort of the gut microbiome, when you have kind of a balanced microbiome, you find that you can tolerate some things that were harder to digest before, right? Because you need that intact. Sometimes I have people take digestive enzymes for a little while. And things that are harsh, they're just harsh. Like raw broccoli, not everyone can eat. Right. So a lot of people really need to at least steam that broccoli and then chop it up. Yeah. So that you can digest it better. And the same is true of cabbage.
Kale too. I find it really hard.
Yeah. See, kale is variable, but those are all cruciferous vegetables, and they're important. You need those cruciferous vegetables, particularly, they help actually with hormonal balance as we age and things like that. So we want them. They have really good things in them, but we have to find a way to eat them. And so some people need to saute or steam or blanch things, and especially the harsher ones.
Yeah.
Whereas
yeah.
other things digest very easily, like other leafy greens.
What about, I was reading about liposomal vitamin C, that you get more actually active ingredient in the liposomal vitamin C than you do if you just take a tablet. Is that true?
We don't know exactly. One of the things that I would say is that vitamin C tends to absorb fairly well for most people, one. And two, no matter how much of it you take, and in any form, there is a limit on what your system will absorb because it's tightly regulated.
Okay.
So the thing of it is, I have a family member, for example, who was having sort of this chronic low-grade infectious thing. So I wanted him to take a lot of vitamin C every day. And it really, once he took a high enough dose, then he was absorbing as much as he's going to absorb, really. And we use vitamin C in our clinical trials. We find that really any oral form of it, you're only going to absorb so much of it because there's such tight regulation in the gut. When we need a higher amount than that, then we infuse it to get the response that we want, because we have to bypass the gut.
Right.
So
right.
I say, vitamin C, if your gut is fairly well functioning, it shouldn't matter that much.
Okay. Let's do a myth buster.
Okay.
Pregnancy brain. Do you forget everything?
So the thing about pregnancy brain and other different states is when hormones, go awry, and when you have major shifts in hormones, it affects the brain in the way the brain thinks.
Okay.
So I think that it's different for different people. Some people, they don't notice anything, but some people see the hormonal shifts aren't as dramatic as they are for other people.
Right. Okay. And I had a friend I was speaking to today who went through cancer treatment.
Yep.
And she goes, my brain is like fried.
Chemo brain.
Chemo brain. So that's a real thing.
It's a real thing.
Chemo brain's a real. Does it come back? Like, how long does it take?
Yeah, it often comes back, and we have been doing different types of studies on nutrient-based therapies. We also find that actually a combination of dealing with stress, getting the brain quiet, and making sure the brain is well fed often does a lot.
So your diet would be helpful for her. Okay, perfect. The trauma. Okay, so trauma, crisis, PTSD kind of thing. I noticed that I'm missing I didn't have a brain injury per se, but I had a trauma. I'm missing pieces of memory. Like, I just don't. My kids go, "Don't you remember that?" I go, "No, I don't remember it at all. I can remember childhood. I can remember certain times, but certain years just previous to that, no, not so much." So is that trauma do that to the brain?
Yes. So we show the pre-post brain scans. We did a study on traumatic stress, and we show the pre-post brain scans in Brainweaver. And actually in the other book I did this year, Tapestry of Health, I actually show those brain scans as well, because that's a more global health book. And traumatic stress affects the brain, it affects the body. So what we mean by traumatic stress is a highly distressing event that it still is causing distress in your life a long time after it happened.
Okay.
So what we found, what's that?
It fits.
What we found is that, we used a technique that we were studying called the neuroemotional technique, which is a mind-body intervention. We talk a lot about it in the book.
Yeah.
There's a website for it. There's a form of it you can do yourself, but for the really big events, we recommend you do it with somebody who is really experienced and certified in that intervention. But we found in 3 to 5 sessions of a big event that people had for a long, long time, the brain changed dramatically. And not only did the brain change, how the person felt changed. Okay. So are there physically what happened to them? There's things you can do.
Okay. So, but I'd like to carry that just through a second.
Yeah.
So after that, the physical, like the brain change, but what physically happened for them? Like, who were they after? They came back as a former personality, or like, what did they
these are the objective things that we measured. we looked at the brain, but then we looked at what does that correlate with? So we looked at mood scores, anxiety scores, distress scores, what related to the event, but just globally. And all of those things changed. And in addition, the body's reaction to cues of the distressing event changed. So when we had people hooked up to biofeedback and they were given a script or a cue of what had happened, they go into that fight or flight mode that I talked about. After the intervention, when it was effective, and it was for most of the people who got it, that didn't happen, which means their whole body changed.
So where is that available? I'm signing up right now.
So we put the website in the book, and I'll tell you what it is now for if you're looking for a practitioner. It's netmindbody.com. And we also show you in the book a way to sort of do it for those smaller events yourself. You kind of need a practitioner for the bigger ones because it's hard to be in both roles when you get into the deep emotion of some of those things that happen. And it's really a mind-body intervention. It's based upon principles of cognitive psychology, but also based in the energy circuits of the body. Right.
Okay. Very cool. Let's talk about, because people want to do this all the time, how to change your brain, how to change your thoughts. And I talk, to them about the little deer path. You want to make a big change. And so you have to start thinking differently, but it takes a while for that brain synapse to go to that as the first thought instead of the old thought being the first thought.
That's right.
With me, right?
Right.
How long does that take for that little deer path to become a deep rut and become the next first thought?
This is a great question, and it's something that we think a lot about, because what you're really talking about is how do you change the brain's communication with itself? And these are neurological pathways. We look at these neurological pathways when we're doing the functional neuroimaging, and we know that the way the brain communicates with itself can change, and it can change in a dramatic way. And it depends upon if you're doing it in this way where you're doing those cognitive exercises, which are really critical, really important. And if you have a little booster help by doing interventions like the neuroemotional technique, because we've seen the pathways change. Now, some of those old scripts, I like to call them, those things that we tell ourselves that we're not even realizing we're saying it. One of the things that even when I'm doing the neuroemotional technique with people, when we get to some sort of pivotal place, I'll be like, okay, right now, what are you saying to yourself about yourself in regard to this? Because it's usually something terrible.
Very negative. Yeah.
And brutal. When we got to shine the spotlight on these things that we're saying to ourselves about ourselves, the ugly things that we're saying to ourselves about ourselves, the more we shine the spotlight on them, then the more with our adult rational, because they're usually from, things that aren't about today, they're about an unfair teacher or a bad parent or something like that, but like when we shine the spotlight on the things we're saying to ourselves about ourselves, then our adult logical cognitive brain can step in and say, but is that true? And is there a different way to look at this? And create some space between you and that script. And this is, we talk about that process and some of the exercises that you can do in the book. We talk about how you do a little bit of self-NET, but also when you're stuck, what are the resources you need to be thinking about?
Okay, let's talk about the crossword puzzles, the things that people say, oh, I'm training I'm giving my brain health here. Like, is luminosity, you mentioned that seems to be okay-ish. What can we do at home to get our brain firing?
First of all, use your brain. And, I sometimes
keep learning.
I sometimes feel like,
your people are brainless.
I was fortunate enough to have my, my grandmother in the home when I was growing up, and she was from that sort of old school. She lived till 90. She would have lived longer if she wouldn't have fallen. You know what I mean? But her brain was so good, and I don't know. She was from a family of farmers, and I think that farmers thought in a really practical way. And she would say things like, I have to use my hands, I have to use my brain, or I'm going to lose them both. Yeah. So she would do her wash by hand, hang things on the line, and all winter long do, jigsaw puzzles, the crossword puzzles, things like that. And I thought, I don't know if that helps or not, but actually the data shows that actually we do need to keep using our brain and engaging the brain in new and creative ways.
Yeah.
And so doing cognitive exercises and doing creative things, that combination will keep your brain in a really good place.
My dad's 96 and he's amazing. Amazing.
Does he do these things?
He's playing the stock market. He's having fun doing that.
That's right. That's really great. Because it makes him think about the different companies, and he looks at their financials and all those kinds of things. He's keeping that brain active. One of the things that the mistake that sometimes people make is they retire and then stop thinking about things.
Yeah.
And that's when you often see a decline. And, there was one study done on a small group of people that were engaged in doing these things, puzzles, things like that. This was actually a study on a group of nuns. And that even though there were on brain imaging and brain biopsy, the decline, the age-related decline that you often see, the sharpness of the people was better than would be predicted based upon what their brains looked like, because what was still there was toned.
So do you think that it's fair to say then that this past year and a half with, being on COVID pandemic brain, we should be kind of nice to ourselves, say it's okay, it's going to come back. Your brain, I can't remember names. I'm looking at actors going, I know who that is. I can see them. I can, I know. If I stop thinking, it'll come to me. But while you're thinking about it, you go, how come I can't remember who they are? I can't even remember my own name sometimes. It's crazy, but it comes back.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think that a lot of people, the thing of it is one way that we survive, we have all these defense mechanisms that help us to survive. And one of the things we do is we sort of minimize, this isn't such a big deal. And that's okay that we do that in the moment. Mm-hmm. But the reality is the last year and a half has been a big deal.
It has.
And the fact that it has distressed you to some degree, that's just normal. And so some of these things that you're talking about are just a distressed, fatigued brain, that the answer to it is not to be overly critical, but to, how do I be kind to my body and brain? How do I start to nurture it, feed it, do nice things, do loving things? I'm a fan of mindfulness meditation. And one of the meditation exercises is called the loving kindness meditation, where you kind of put yourself in a loving kindness place during the meditation, or just doing something really, simple. There's all kinds of just simple 2, 3, 4, 5-minute exercises you can do to just start the process of reconnecting to yourself in a way that's kind. Mm-hmm. Because we got disconnected from ourselves in order to survive. We went into survival mode.
Right.
We went into that fight or flight mode. Now we need to reconnect so that we can be in that kind restoration, recuperation mode.
It was interesting when my mom passed away. At her funeral, somebody asked me for my phone number, and I gave them a phone number I had when I was 12. I couldn't tell you what that phone number is today, but it came out, and it was like, wow, that's really weird. But everything is in our brain. It's in the subconscious, right? It's all stored there. You can.
There's so much in the brain, and I think that when we're in that distressed fight or flight mode, then we're really in survival thinking versus having being as readily accessible to the parts of the brain that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Okay, aluminum cans.
Yeah.
Not good.
I'm not a fan.
Is it Alzheimer's? I mean,
I'm not a fan because the thing of it is we get exposed to a lot of aluminum. In terms of real clinical data, it's soft, but it's enough for me to say I minimize my exposure to aluminum.
Get your fillings out.
But it's not the worst problem with the cans a lot of times. It's the lining of the cans that have all types of toxins, BPA, things like that. So it isn't just the aluminum itself, it's everything else that can has in it. And we know from studies, for example, that fresh fruits and vegetables add longevity to you, except in one large population-based study, people who ate the canned stuff, particularly like canned fruits, it actually had the reverse effect, because there's what's in the can, there's what you preserve the stuff with before you put it in the can. So what you end up eating is a bowl of chemicals that aren't that great for your body versus like something nutritive.
I was 3 years old. You're old. I think you're old enough to remember Dr. Kildare. And there was an episode where somebody had botulism from eating canned green beans. My whole life, I can't eat canned stuff. I was so scared. I was so traumatized at that.
I'm traumatized of the smell of coming home from school and somebody cooking canned beets. Oh my God, I think my mother used to make them. The smell of canned beets cooking. I wouldn't eat a beet until I was like 30 years old. And then I realized, beets actually can be good.
That's hilarious. Oh my gosh. Well, I want to thank you again for, it's an important book. It's an important topic, and we don't think enough about it. I mean, I know a lot of people worry about a stroke. They worry about, how can I get through that? I had a friend, also a motorcyclist, had a severe motorcycle accident, brain injury, trauma. I think the glaucoma scale was like 3, the trunk of wood, they said. They thought he was going to go. He came back and he got his master's of education, which is a phenomenal feat. I mean, wow. Really, when he had little post-it notes around his room, my name is, I am, this is, at the beginning of it. And then like a year later goes and our brain is absolutely fabulous.
Listen, it is one of the most amazing organs. I remember being in medical school, and I was very bored the first half of the first year. And then in the second half of the first year, we did neuroanatomy. We started to learn some of these pathways to the brain and from the brain back down. And I'm like, wow, this is the thing that now really excites me and interests me and intrigues me.
I should ask you about the vagus nerve.
Yeah.
Because that's a big thing. It's coming up all the time.
The vagus nerve is part of that restoration and recuperation. That's the main neurological pathway, is through the vagus nerve. And that's why we think about vagus nerve stimulation and things like that. Because
it goes into the gut?
Yes. Oh, yes. So the gut, oh my gosh, the gut has its own nervous system. It's as if there's a separate brain there when it comes to all of the nervous connections. But the vagus nerve also, it goes beyond the gut, and that is part of the restoration recuperation pathway. And so the vagus nerve is very important, and that's why vagus nerve stimulation is part of some of the up and coming treatments for even some of the severe psychiatric problems.
I found out about it because of chronic pain, that it's supposed to alleviate chronic pain and also help people overcome the depression, get off opioids, like all kinds of stuff.
Because it puts the nervous system at ease when you stimulate that vagus nerve.
Okay. All right. Interesting. So interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I can see how you would get excited. And I got the feeling as I read your book that you guys are so different from the rest of the medical community in that you get to really play and be curious. Yes. I find a lot of times they're not very curious. They just, this is what we learned, this is the way it is. And I'm very fortunate. I have a doctor who, whatever, if I need something, she goes, well, go find out about it, let me know. And if it's different, if it's Chinese medicine, whatever, she goes, yeah, okay, I'll research it, I'll look, yeah, okay, that's cool. If it works for you, come back and tell me, I can tell my other patients. I love that. Like I love that. Open, and she's not like afraid, I'm challenging her knowledge or anything. It's not that. It's like, let's work together, right? Yes. I know my body, you know your business. Right. I think that's important, that people can't just be carte blanche to their doctors and say, hey, yeah, oh, you know more than me, so yeah, okay. I mean, you have a brain and a gut that feels things and knows things subconsciously.
I want to end by actually underscoring your point. This point is so important because we have to be proactive with our health. In this country, we've gotten into this mode where we're the passive recipients of healthcare. When there's something that, is a disease process, then we'll go to the doctor will say this, we do this, but that's not health. That's intervening in disease. That's disease care. Health and maintaining health and enhancing health is something that you have to be a proactive participant in. That's something that you actually take the reins on. And so all of the things we're talking about are about health and wellness. And that really isn't what our current medical model is set up for. Otherwise, we wouldn't have such abysmal health outcomes.
Yeah.
We arguably have the best medicine in the world. People come from all over the world to learn our surgical techniques. We have the best pharmaceuticals for when you really need a pharmaceutical, all of those things. Yet, the health status of our country, it's not top 10, it's not top 20, it's not even top 30. Because there is a disconnect between the medical care for acute illnesses that we have and health and wellness.
Yeah. Wow. I like that. Thank you for saying that, because it's so true. I mean, I live in Canada, but I agree with you. I know the state of health in both countries.
Right.
It's kind of abysmal. And a lot of that is, I don't know what it has to do with. Anyway, thank you. Wonderful book, Brain Weaver. It's out. It's May. It's out now. You guys can go and pick up this book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, I'm sure, all of the usual places. And sorry that we missed Dr. Newberg, but Dr. Monti, you're a show on itself. So
thank you. Well, if you want to hear him and I talking about the book more, we also have a website, brainweaver.net, and some of our webcasts that we did together to talk about different topics of the book. If people want to hear us a little more, or just read the book, whatever you like.
Fascinating. Yeah, do both. I'm going to encourage you guys to do both. I'm going to say goodbye to Facebook. I'm going to stop our live stream. Okay. And I'm just going to stop our recording. Wonderful job. Thank you.